Hi there, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I am starting this channel to raise awareness and share information about compassionate body listening, which is a methodology that I created in order to heal from Lyme disease and chronic fatigue syndrome. And I have worked with a number of people now who've had CFS and other people who've had chronic pain, fibromyalgia, and long COVID and have been suffering from very intense long-term symptoms. And this nervous system approach has helped them regain their energy and get their lives back. So I feel really strongly about sharing this approach because of how life-altering it can be. And also because there are so many different approaches out there. And for me, I needed something that worked for the way that I think and the way that I move in the world. And I created this approach for me and anybody else that needs this. So I'm trying to reach people who need this because I really care about being able to regain our health. I mean, it's the difference between a life of quite intense physical suffering, very intense physical suffering, mental suffering, or not. And yeah, it's life altering to be able to access the benefits of this work if it's something that resonates with you specifically. So, I'm going to explain a little bit about my past experience with CFS to help you understand how severe my situation was. Hopefully, that can raise your hope that it might potentially work for you. But I honestly think that you can only really know that it works for you, that you can create your own nervous system regulation until you try it. And the proof is in what you experience and what you create for yourself. And I just want to explain that nervous system regulation, I believe, is very, very important for people who are suffering from CFS to address. I understand that it is a multi-system illness. It affects multiple systems in the body. And so it's not that I'm saying that nervous system regulation describes the whole of CFS. It really does not. The effects are on multiple levels. Um, but the nervous system work is a very important component of CFS recovery. And a doctor at Stanford told me once, if my patients don't or cannot address their crashes, they never recover. And that is very profound. And I do feel strongly that it's important to create enough regulation to stop those crashes happening. Because every time we crash, it's a huge level of stress on the body. And we don't really give ourselves the chance to recover. Um, we need rest. We need regulation. We need rest that's constructive, that is regulated rest. When we're resting and when we're completely dysregulated, it's just like we don't make any progress, right? We're just stuck in freeze mode or fight flight. And that rest doesn't really take us anywhere, doesn't take us forward. I mean, we can recover from those crashes, but then the crash happens again. And when we're recovering from those crashes, it lasts for such a long time, or can. So, in order to get our lives back, we need to reduce the amount of time that we're recovering from crashes and also reduce the crashes themselves, surely, in order to make progress and build up our reserves and be able to do more things. So, yeah, that's how I think about it in a nutshell. Um, there's obviously a lot more to it, which I'm going to explain in future videos. But for now, I will just talk about my experience with CFS. So, I got CFS when I was 28, and I was affected by it for at least 10 years, if not longer than that. I would say maybe 14 years total. But the last few years were a lot better than the first 10 because of this work. Um, from one day to the next almost, I went from functional to not. And I could feel that everything in my body was shifting. And there was a sense of dread and doom. And I could feel that my body wasn't creating energy in the way that it had before. It was going into a kind of freeze mode, shut down kind of state, which I didn't understand at the time. And this was followed by just months and months of like just incapacity for life, incapacity to move. And it got worse and worse. And I didn't really want to accept that my life was being so restricted. And so I continued to push in certain ways. I was working a stressful full-time job and was meant to be organizing a wedding. I had to leave my job. I had to kind of pause things on the wedding, but it was really hard to organize the handover from the job that I was doing. So there was a kind of institutional knowledge problem going on. It was quite a small organization. And so the handover literally took like 8 months for me to explain all the documents and go through all the work that I was doing. So even though had reached my limit and I had to stop my job, I couldn't completely finish it because there was still this handover period. Anyway, that pushed me into a deeper level of fatigue that was so bad that just everything stopped. I couldn't walk anymore. I deteriorated dramatically and I was just completely non-functional. I remember many moments, long periods of time, when lying in my bed felt like it took too much energy just to lie down in my bed. And every time I moved, I would crash. Like if I tried to get out of the bed and brush my teeth, I would crash and be in a lump on the floor within seconds. So in my case, the CFS was very, very severe. I didn't think could get any worse, but it did, which is unbelievable, but it did. I got it in, so I was experimenting with lots of different approaches to try and recover. And one of the ideas that I had was, okay, I've tried all these different brain retrainings, it hasn't worked. I've exhausted all medical options, that hasn't worked. How about I look at my trauma and try and address my past trauma? So I did that, and I was told by I was doing an EFT kind of intensive to try to address everything. And I was told that I would feel better and I would have magical sleep and just to come and do it. They were really trying to encourage me, but it was physically so beyond what I could actually do that it pushed me into an even deeper level of dysfunction. I mean, I didn't think that it could get any worse because I was so bad. But at this point, the because of the pushing that I did during those 10 days of that retreat, it created this intense level of even further dysregulation in my nervous system that meant that I was so dysregulated that I literally couldn't catch a deep breath anymore and I couldn't sleep. And that was absolutely awful. Like the sleep before that had been so bad anyway. But now I literally couldn't sleep. And so I was awake 24 hours a day. I mean, I know that medically people say that even if you think that you don't fall asleep, that you kind of do in like little micro moments, but it really didn't feel that way to me. I felt like I was awake all the time. And I had I was already bedbound, and then I couldn't sleep on top of that. And inflammation in my body went out of control. I reacted to all the food that I ate. I had pain in my joints. I couldn't move my fingers at one point. It was just absolutely extreme, and I couldn't function. I didn't, I'd lost my job. I didn't have any friends. Well, I couldn't really maintain close friendships because there was nothing I could really give. Like we couldn't talk, or, it was just not possible. Um, so it was a very extreme situation. Um, yeah, so that's just like painting the picture of how terrible it was. On top of that, I found out that I had Lyme disease, and some of you may have been to see the CFS clinic at Stanford, visited there and done the tests. And there have been studies that show that people with CFS, when they have like the levels of bacterial infections and viral infections that other people have in the general population, that their immune systems, people's immune systems who have CFS react more intensely to the presence of those pathogens, and that your body's in a state of stress and the immune system, like the cell danger response, which is a marker for inflammation, um, is really high. And one of the approaches of the CFS clinic is to reduce, at Stanford, I mean, is to reduce the level of bacterial infections that you have or the level of viruses. Um, so I did some of that, didn't work. Um, the Lyme treatment did have an impact, but it also made me worse first. So that was the situation. So I was very, very sick, to put it mildly. And I was also not in a good personal situation, which I won't go into, but it was all round. There was no safety to be found in my body or in my personal environment. So it was a very, very difficult time. I took some time by myself. I remember like crawling to this other room that was a bit separate in the house that I was in, that I was living in, and it felt like my sanctuary. I would go there and just, I don't know, try and help myself in different ways at various points. I used to play the piano before I got sick, and sometimes there was a piano in there, and I would just go and use the tiny, tiny amount of energy that I had to sit up at that piano and press some of the keys or like little things like that. But that room was where I went to kind of like try to live a little bit. I don't know how to describe that exactly, but that's, yeah, that's kind of what that space was for me. Not that I could really do anything. Every time I tried to do something, I would crash and then, have to lie on the floor again. And it was all, I would say, pretty hellish at that time. And one day when I was in that room, I I was taking stock of all the different things that I had tried and how none of them had worked. And just this kind of mindset that I'd been in, where I think I had felt both kind of not good enough for failing at the brain retraining, um, and also not good enough for not being a healthy, well person who could like contribute to society, because my mindset had been so formed by that society that I used to be part of, that our worth or yeah, our worth and usefulness to the world is determined by how productive we can be in our jobs, or like what we're doing actively to serve the world. Um, and yeah, I ended up feeling just not good enough. And I remember being in that room and just kind of like in a broader perspective. looking over everything that I had done and everything that I had tried, everything that I had done in the past before that also had led me to get so unwell and so sick. Not that I fully understood everything, but I knew that the way I'd been living wasn't constructive to maintain my health. Wasn't really my fault. Exactly. It's not really about fault anyway, is it? It's just about our beliefs and how we formed those beliefs and then how we live. Um, but in some ways, I'd felt like it was my fault. So there was all this shame and blame and stress on top of all of the horrible symptoms that I'd been experiencing. And it just felt like this sort of constant pressure. And I wanted to get better, and I was like fighting to get better. There was something in me that just, I wanted my life, and I think that's a positive thing. But I was fighting and resisting in different ways, shaming myself, blaming myself. Anyway, there was this moment in that room that was my sanctuary where I realized that the only thing that I hadn't tried was accepting, was permitting myself to be as messed up as I was, to be as sick as I was, to have made all those mistakes, to have shamed and blamed myself the way I had. And I experimented with this idea of surrender for the first time, possibly in my life, to that level, but definitely with the CFS and the Lyme. And I remember nothing changed in my physical experience, but something like a level of pressure just sort of let go. It was kind of a mental or emotional pressure, and there was a kind of level of emotional relief, and maybe a very slight change in my physiology because of that. But obviously, when we're so depleted from the level of severity of our CFS, it feels like a drop in the ocean when we do those little things. I'll explain more about that later. It doesn't mean they're not worthwhile, and I'll explain that later too. Um, but yeah, I had that moment. And then I experimented further with that kind of surrendered attitude towards myself, or having, I think, being willing to be present with ourselves exactly as we are is an aspect of compassion, a really important part of compassion, where we're willing to be alongside ourselves when we are suffering. And that's what I think was happening in that experience. And that attitude of being softer towards myself and more compassionate was an amazing discovery. And it fed a new way of relating to myself that was very important for my recovery and for the foundation of the technique that I am teaching. Basically, gradually, I started to orient towards myself with more compassion and unconditional acceptance and willingness to be present with myself. So rather than in the depth of my suffering, push it away, resist it, hate it, shame myself, blame myself, I started to experiment with, okay, what are the mechanics of how I can be softer with myself and present with myself in the depths of what the presence that I can be with myself. What does that look like? What does that feel like? How do I do it? How can I bring unconditional love and a full presence to my body, to myself, no matter what? And that presence was a different kind of presence with myself than had been there previously because the character of it was different. I was using my own compassion and I was accessing that kind of deep self, deep sense of self. Maybe you could say the soul to be with myself. I mean, when we're in a state of being instead of doing or trying or seeking, is a different kind of presence. We're accessing stillness and an energy of soul, um, I think, or a deep self, or just like if even from a secular perspective, there's a different aspect of the self. It's the part of the self that is constant, no matter what happens on the outside or the inside. There is part of the self that is untouched by our symptoms, by our thoughts, by our feelings, something completely immutable and unreachable by anything that happens to us, any human being, any bad experience we can have. That I do believe that there is this constant identity underneath all of the human experiences that we have. So anyway, that was the kind of presence, and it was compassionate presence. And I brought that to my body to be with my body in a constructive, positive way. And it started to create a sense of comfort and safety in myself, belonging in myself. And that grew to involving a dialogue as well. So I would use that compassionate presence to dialogue with my body about what it needed and wanted to feel better, to create some delight, to bring in the energy of comfort and happiness and um, and it was really utterly life transforming to reach out for the things that my body, that my deeper self loves and wants to have in my life. And the thing is that no matter how sick we have become, we can always, not only can we access that presence with ourselves, we can always access that wisdom of ourselves. We can always find out what we need to add in a little bit of delight or comfort or safety. And no matter how sick we've become, we can also consult our bodies and our deeper self for what alterations of those things will make it possible for those things to be accessible. So, for instance, if your body is calling out for dancing, but you cannot dance, you are stuck in a bed, there are adaptations that you can do that you can ask your body about. So you can ask your body, how can I have a flavor of this delight without causing you to crash, without overstretching you? And there are these lovely little adaptations that you can do, like rolling around on the floor, jiggling to your favorite music for 30 seconds or however long your body gives you. You can always find out from your own inner authority, how long can I have this experience or taste of delight or comfort for? And what's important is just keeping that dialogue open and being willing to consult one's own inner authority for what one needs. Because we all know deep down what we need. We actually do, but it's just hard to access it, especially underneath all the symptoms, especially underneath all of the shame, the blame, the stress, the feelings. And it's all so understandable that it's hard to access, but I also don't want to discount the possibility in your minds that it's possible. that you can access that inner wisdom, and that inner wisdom can take you to regulation, can take you to wellness, and eventually to your symptoms alleviating. So that is what I see with the clients I work with, and also what happened to me. So as I began to give myself that unconditionally positive regard and willingness to listen, and when I actually acted on that listening, implemented what my body asked for, listened to its limits, didn't push beyond, some really incredible things started to happen. So I started to be able to do more things, and I started to feel more regulated, and I stopped crashing so much. And it was a long process because I didn't know what I was doing. So I wasn't as consistent with it. Like, it was quite weird for me to be so unconditionally loving to myself after a whole lifetime of not being that way with myself. It was so weird to trust myself enough to listen to my own inner authority. It was so weird for me to not live in resistance to my own truth. So it was a process. It was a long growth process. But the thing is, all of it was kind of perfect because I needed to go through, I needed to work through how it works. I needed to understand um, what it's like to drop that resistance. I needed to understand the mechanics of how can I bring unconditional positive regard and compassion and that deeper presence to myself, even in the midst of my deepest crash. Like, can I do that? How can I do that? I had to learn how. So what I'm teaching is like the process of how to do that for ourselves, and how to recognize how to build trust, but also how to recognize when we're in those different nervous system states and demystify it somewhat and keep creating that trust with the body that it can know what it needs to regulate again. Um, so yeah, I think I'm gonna leave this video here at this point. But I am going to be sharing more videos about how this process worked. Um, I will talk about the nervous system a bit more and what I discovered afterwards in terms of polyvagal theory as to how and why this works to create regulation. But basically, this approach is consulting your own inner authority for what you need to get better, not looking outside. And that's how regulation is created, because if we look outside for the answers and we look outside for the regulation, we are outsourcing our sense of safety to other things. And that's not creating safety within, that's not creating regulation from within that's sustainable. So if this approach sounds like it resonates with you, please come back and listen to further videos to get some more information about it. I'm going to be sharing various things. I'm going to be sharing a free document with some broad strokes information about regulation and how to create it. I'm going to be sharing an email sign up series where I've worked through quite a number of inputs that I can help with starting to create regulation in a more in-depth way, and explaining more about the process and explaining more about the nervous system. So you can sign up for that to get info. I'm also creating an online course right now, which will be available soon. And you can also sign up for one-to-one coaching. I'll also be offering some group coaching at some point. So yeah, that's all of that for now. And I look forward to connecting with you again. And I really hope that my story can give you some hope for your own journey. And I do believe that it's absolutely possible to create regulation no matter how dysregulated you've become, no matter how much inflammation you have. Um, the thing is that this capacity to regulate is innate, it's within us. And we were regulated before, and we were well before at some point in our lives. And so we know that we can come back to that place. And the neural pathways that were created at that time are still there. They just need to be activated. And they are activated through this process because we're coming back to ourselves, we're coming back to listening to what we need, and coming back to those memories that the body has as well of the things that delight it and give it comfort and a feeling of safety and belonging. And yeah, it's totally possible to recreate. It's a process, it's a learning process of trial and error. Um, and it's not a perfect system, as in it's not going to be a perfect trajectory. It's not going to be like, oh, I know what to do now, and then it's all the way up. It's more like I'll remember to check in with myself. I'll remember to do it in this situation, and then there'll be another situation where it's so um, challenging to mount that level of presence or willingness to be present with oneself, even and compassionate, um, that it will just feel like, the bottom's fallen out of the practice for a certain moment. But even that is part of the learning process because when we learn that no matter how far away we've gone, no matter how dysregulated we've become, no matter how unwilling we've been to be present with ourselves, we can always come back. We can always learn the mechanics of how to come back to ourselves and practice. So all is not lost is the broad message that I want to share, that it's absolutely possible to regulate and come back to a sense of safety again. So yeah, I wish you all well, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Bye.